of course.
I never had the opportunity to meet Jim Shields. He died a few years ago, but he was, of course, a close friend and colleague of Professor Gottesman, who basically seduced me into the twin business by constantly giving me papers to read about twins. I must say it's his fault that I'm doing this, but I'd appreciate it if you'd say a few things about Shields and the discussions you had with him.
I would be glad to do so, because he was a remarkable man. He was originally trained as a social worker, I think, when quite young, and in 1940 he went to France, and he was captured and was in a German camp during the whole of the war. Then he came back and continued his training in social science, and then he started to take an interest in general in genetic factors in mental disorders. But then he was hit by a very nasty polio, and he was paralyzed completely.
I understand that was just before the creation of the vaccine.
Yes.
Yes.
And he was in a wheelchair, and he did all that work, collecting the 40-some cases, and doing it without any assistance at all, hardly. He did the interviewing, he did the psychological testing. He was alone. He was in an office there could only be 2 chairs in his office, and there he sat quite alone and worked, and I remember visiting him, and he was, as Gottesman probably have told you, quite unusual man and gifted man. He was a very conscientious researcher. He was a very careful man in all respects, and I came to London when I was doing my study, and his study was published in '62, I think, and mine in '65. Right. So my book has been very much influenced by his publication, in the way that I felt that what I could do was to supplement his more extensive investigation with a deeper probing, a more intensive study
of individual cases.
Yes, of the individual cases. Yeah. And I was able to do follow-up studies, and that's very easy in Denmark to follow persons. And so in this way, his work was of the greatest importance for my work, and very sad message.
Yeah. Professor Gottesman constantly urges me to go back and read what Shields said about this and what Shields said about that, because of the great care and thoroughness and thoughtfulness with which he addressed all of these questions. And I've always found it productive to do that. There's no question about it.
I had the opportunity to study one single case together with him. It's not included in my study, but in his. That was a widely separated pairs, monozygotic twins. One was brought up in Chile, and the other one was brought up in Denmark. But that twin, the last mentioned, moved to London, and I interviewed her there, and so we had this pair together, and that was quite interesting.
That was remarkable, yeah.